Good day and greetings, everybody. This is Jeff Ginsburg here, and on behalf of my co-chairs, Teri Manolio and Peter Goodhand, welcome to the November IHCC workshop and strategic planning session. While the pandemic has continued to challenge all of us, we're making great progress as an organization. This is a great time to reconnect, nearly 6 months to the day from our May virtual summit. All of you should have received the agenda for today and for Wednesday's meetings as well. So what I'd like to do now is just very briefly set the stage. So if the slide, you can go to the next slide, please. And the first thing I'd like to do is welcome our newest IHCC members, the Generation Victoria cohort, the Kathmandu cohort, and the Makere University population cohort. These are the most recent members of the IHCC, which now stands at roughly 110 cohorts, which is terrific. Next slide. I wanted to remind everybody of the IHCC vision, which was really set in 2018 when we first assembled to create a global network of large cohorts with multidimensional data from diverse populations for translational research that would be maximally utilized to enhance the scientific understanding of the biological, environmental, and genetic basis of disease and to improve population health. And while this vision has been around for the last couple of years, it's possible that it will change now as a result of the strategic planning sessions that we're going to be having over the next couple of days. So with that in mind, our meeting objectives on the next slide are to really review what happened in the May 2020 Third International Cohort Summit and provide an update to our membership on progress, as well as to continue to engage all of you as much as you're willing to be engaged. So we're going to have a working group and team reports, which will be the first sessions both today and on Wednesday. And then the second objective of this workshop is to engage the entirety of the IHCC membership in developing a cohesive strategic plan that addresses the vision, scientific direction, and unique challenges of global cohort collaboration. And this is important, of course, for us to know where we are and where we're going, as we'll talk about this afternoon. And a number of our funders have actually requested this, so it's very timely and important. And the strategic planning breakout sessions will take place both the second part of today's meeting as well as on Wednesday. And you'll meet Laura Runnels, who is an expert in helping organizations like ours conduct strategic planning. So we're really excited about this opportunity. Next slide has just an overview of the objectives from, if you can go back one, please. This is what we set out to do in the Third International Cohort Summit in May. One was to present a charter and a path forward that would help us understand our organization, membership, partnership opportunities, and policies in industry engagement. We also at that time began to think with the encouragement of both Francis Collins and Jeremy Farrar, how do we really mobilize the cohorts in ways that could help address COVID-19 pandemic research. And the third important aspect of the meeting in May was the first demonstration of a functional cohorts atlas that would be used to discover cohorts around the world and enable. The last thing that we did in May was to really take the entire, engage the membership in really thinking about the future scientific agenda, which hopefully will be part of the discussions for the strategic planning. Next slide, please. So this is what we did. We actually developed a membership agreement. You'll be hearing more about that in the next session, as well as policies. We also mobilized our constituency to address COVID-19 pandemic research, and you'll be hearing about some proposals that were reviewed and that are underway in that regard. We also saw the results of a prototype polygenic risk score project that that was carried out across a number of global cohorts successfully, and I think that is now moving towards publication. We did, as I said, demonstrate the global cohorts data atlas, which will be a topic of discussion also, I think, on Wednesday. We heard from a number of esteemed scientists around the globe about where IHCC could play an important role. And we also heard from a number of industry groups, importantly, that they were interested in helping the IHCC move forward and be active participants in research. And we challenged ourselves to put out a scientific proposal call, which we did, and you'll hear more about the results of that in the coming sessions. So with that as sort of the stage setting for today, I'm going to turn the first session over to my esteemed partner and co-chair, Teri Manolio.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeff, for getting us started.
Oh,
and
or not. One quick thing. Sorry to. I forgot to mention this. That we have secured funding from the Wellcome Trust as well as from the NIH. Both the organizations have been supporting the IHCC nearly since its inception, and more recently from the Chan Zuckerberg initiative. So we're very grateful to our sponsors for really making what the IHCC doing possible. Sorry, Teri, I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that.
No, very, very important. And also many thanks to Eric Plummer and Teji Rakraburis, who have been doing an incredible job in getting us all set up for today. So please, if you'd go to the next slide. So as Jeff summarized what our objectives were for back in the previous meeting, we would like to spend this first session looking at the first two objectives of that meeting, which were, as shown on the slide, galvanizing the group around a visionary charter and path forward. So we'll spend about half our time on that in this first 2-hour session, and then look at how IHCC can and has actually mobilized worldwide cohorts to address the pandemic. Next, please. And just looking at the first objective, we did have a number of action items and next steps from that, and many of which are complete. We got feedback on the draft charter, and a ratification survey was circulated and tallied. Yes, and Jeff reminds us to use the chat function for any comments and questions, so please do use that. And then provide responses to the data sharing survey by June, and that was done. Providing additional comments on the policy documents, we received some and have made some revisions and are currently reviewing those and want to get them ratified as soon as possible, and we'll hear an update on that. And then encouraging all of you to join the working groups. The key ones are policy and biodata sharing, data and infrastructure, and scientific strategy. And we really do want folks to participate in those, not only because we're trying to form a community, but also because there's a lot to be done. So it would be helpful to have all hands pulling in the same direction. Go to the next slide, please. So focusing now on our first objective, we're going to hear first about the membership agreement, then about the governance implementation, and about policy and biodata sharing from, as noted here, John Connolly, Brittany, Zick, and Laura Lyman Rodriguez. So please, John, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. So my name is John Connolly. I'm a researcher at the Center for Applied Genomics at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I also support the Secretariat, and in that capacity, I've been helping our chair, Mary De Silva, develop the IHCC Charter, which is now called the Membership Agreement. Unfortunately, Mary couldn't make today, but I will give you a little bit of background on the charter to begin with, and then a run through of progress that we've seen since May. Next slide, please. So Mary kind of ended here in April 2020. We did circulate a draft charter for feedback and comments. Mary presented that in May. Since Mary's presentation, We have been collecting and collating feedback from all our members. Most of them have been very positive. We have integrated the feedback into a second working draft. I would say the bottom line here is that the changes are minimal and mostly what we've been addressing is the underlying language of the charter, clarifying areas where we may have been a little bit obtuse. Through the summer, that second draft has been ratified, and we're up to about a third of members now have ratified the membership agreement, and we're kind of at a stage now where we're about to hand that, or we have handed that off to the policy review group. Next slide, please.
John, you're sort of drifting in and out. If you maybe just keep your mouth a little closer to your microphone.
Yeah, okay, sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, so before delving into the agreement itself, I should just again thank the Charter Working Group. So the genesis for the Charter development itself was, as Jeff said, the second IHC summit in Reykjavik, where I think it was universally agreed that we really all needed to coalesce around a guiding set of principles, an agreed upon infrastructure around which we can really build and develop the IHCC, as a research entity, and really in pushing forward translational science. So following that, the Secretariat did send out an invite for volunteers to help lead this charter development work group. And we got, I think, 24 responses in total, which kind of put us in a kind of a luxuriant position where we kind of cherry pick a kind of a smaller working group. And I think the process there in terms of putting together that charter working group is kind of reflected in the goals of the IHCC in toto, which really is to kind of reflect the diversity, first of all, the geographic diversities. We have 6 continents represented here, but also the diversity of the cohorts themselves in terms of ancestries and age groups, and equally as importantly, the diversity of the science. And certainly one of the things that rang through loud and clear from the IHCC summit in Reykjavik, that this is not a genomics consortium. This is much broader than that, and certainly the representatives on the Charter Working Group reflect different aspects of the research areas of the ITC in general. So a big thank you to Arash, Josep, Kobus, Elizabeth, and our hero, Alexander and Tony, who really did work pretty tirelessly, I would say, in getting this working group and this membership agreement together. It's not a glorious task. There's really, it's tough work for little personal gain here, and I think the group was tremendously resilient and responsive, and I think what we put together has been, reflects the principles and the ideals as articulated in that Reykjavik meeting. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to review quickly just the kind of the underlying principles that have guided charter development. And again, these kind of were reflected from the discussions that came through the Reykjavik meeting. And basically, there's 2 principles that are kind of made explicit in the membership agreement itself, and also interwoven implicitly throughout. The first principle is the principle of transparency, both in terms of process and practice and outcomes. And that's reflected most of all in the decision-making for the consortium as we move forward. So it's 1 member, 1 vote, entirely democratic decision-making process. We also listened and heard and made explicit again in the membership agreement the need for transparency in terms of the entire working model of the IHCC itself. So in terms of how we reach out to cohorts and how projects are reviewed, that is very explicit and handled in a transparent way. The second principle underlining the membership agreement, and again the IHCC as an entity, is fairness, inclusivity, and equity for all. And again, this, as I said, was reflected in the cohort working group themselves, and it will be reflected in the IHCC as a organization moving forward. That it's not a genomics consortium. It does address many different types of science: social science, biomedicine, epidemiology. Again, we're inclusive of all age groups and all ancestries, all data types, and all geographies. Next slide, please.
And John, if you could hold your microphone just a little bit away from your mouth.
I just saw your chat. How are we doing here? Thank you.
No worries.
Okay. So I'm going to delve a little bit now into I won't obviously go through all of the content in the membership agreement, but there's two main things we looked at in May, and I want to revisit now, which are governance and membership. Before jumping right into those, I should take a step back and again reiterate a point that Mary has made, and we have striven to make throughout this process, is that the membership agreement is not a legal document. Rather, it's rules of engagement for our members, outlining the requirements and expectations of IHC members. So much of what we've been doing, certainly since May, in terms of editing and updating the membership agreement, has really been kind of making that explicit and kind of taking out some of the more legalese, or softening more of the legalese language that might have been there. So that was one of the reasons why it's not the charter group, it's not a memorandum of understanding, it's a membership agreement. So just a little bit more friendly language there, and this is just really the rules of engagement for us as an entity. Next slide, please. So I won't, Jeff already went through the vision already, so I won't go over that again, other than to say that it's a global network. Again, we're covering many different areas of science, geared towards promoting and driving forward translational research. And the ultimate goal of all this is to improve population health. Next slide. So this is the governance structure as made explicit in the membership agreement itself. There's kind of 4 tiers of governance here. There's an executive committee, a steering committee, a scientific project subcommittee, and then at the bottom we have work groups. So I'll just quickly talk through each of those in turn. So if you go to the next slide. So the executive committee is really responsible and should be responsible for the kind of the strategic direction of the IHCC as an organizational entity. So that's differentiated from the scientific steering committee, which again is primarily responsible for the scientific direction. So the executive committee we foresee as having a chair and 2 co-chairs, or three co-chairs if you like. And those shall be constituted across a 5-year renewable term. In addition, we are proposing to have 4 executive members, which will be nominated and voted by the Scientific Steering Committee on a 3-year term. Logically, these terms should be staggered, so we're not making wholesale swapping in and swapping out. So every year or two, or every year, we would see 1 or 2 members be up for nomination and re-election. So that's the executive committee. We have the scientific steering committee, which, as I said, is really responsible, or should be responsible for the scientific direction of the IHCC as an entity. The members of the scientific committee should be nominated and elected by themselves. And as I stated previously, the democratic rule here is 1 member, 1 vote. We also foresee the scientific steering committee as being constituted by work group co-chairs, which again would be elected by the SSC themselves. And one change that we have made since May is that we have made explicit the need for an industry representative on the Scientific Steering Committee. One of the stated goals of the IHCC is to foster collaboration between academia and industry, and to reflect that we saw the need to block or ring fence a place on the steering committee for an industry representative. Next slide. So operating under the provision of the Scientific Steering Committee, we have a Scientific Projects Subcommittee. And again, this would be largely responsible for reviewing and approving scientific projects. Importantly, projects can be proposed by any member, and the Scientific Subcommittee are also responsible for approving access to IHCC managed data. So we had the first Scientific Project Subcommittee task was reviewing our IHCC funded proposals in the fall, and that worked quite well. So I think so far as a model, this is borne fruit, and it is proven to work today. The final strand of governance here are the work groups. So we have kind of 3 work groups as proposed by the membership agreement: data standards and interoperability. We have the scientific strategy work group and policy and bio data sharing work group. Again, since May, we have seen several other work groups specifically focused on COVID spin out, and going forward, I'm sure there'll be several more work groups, kind of accordion to larger or smaller extents. To the extent that that the Scientific Steering Committee is composed of work group co-chairs, there's obviously not space to put 20 or 30 co-chairs into that Scientific Steering Committee. So currently how we foresee that is that as work groups spin up, they would be siloed under one of these 3 categories. It's possible that these categories may expand going forward, but right now we still have these 3 kind of broad umbrellas of work groups, which again will be reflected in membership of the Scientific Steering Committee. Next slide. So again, I just wanted to make explicit, and this kind of came up in several comments after Mary had presented, can you clearly delineate the difference between the Executive Committee and the Steering Committee? And just to reiterate that point, the Executive Committee is really responsible for the strategic direction of the IHCC as an organizational entity. So that would involve collaboration and meeting with funders and prospective funders. It's responsible to direct the administrative activities of the IHCC, providing work group assignments, leading funding efforts for the IHCC, and fiscal and financial administration. Additionally, the Executive Committee would step in to resolve disputes if that would arrive. The Scientific Steering Committee, on the other hand, really, as I said, is responsible for the long-term scientific direction of the IHCC. It would be responsible for voting and approving new IHCC members. It would approve the goals as set out by the Executive Committee. And an important function there would be to commission and approve papers that are addressing policy and views. It would also be the structure that would review and provide formal acceptance of IHCC policies, protocols, and procedures. Next slide. So the second kind of major content item I wanted to address are the different member types. So the kind of core IHCC members are called the cohort member. The criteria for becoming a cohort member is that you should have 100,000 participants enrolled. There is the possibility to make an exception there if a cohort is representing a disadvantaged or a minority population, and that would be handled on an individual basis by the steering committee. In addition, a cohort member should have longitudinal follow-up or the capacity for longitudinal follow-up of health outcomes. The cohort itself should be selected not selected for a specific disease or condition. Importantly, cohorts are expected to either have biological samples are the ability to collect biological samples, and a core feature, obviously, of the IHCC is collaboration and data sharing. So cohorts should be willing to share either data or metadata, and obviously there's an important distinction between the two. We understand that many cohorts would not be able to share individual level data, but a minimum expectation is that cohorts should be able to share metadata. And there at the bottom, again, making explicit the principle of one cohort, one vote. Next slide, please. And
John, you've been talking about 15 minutes, so if you could wind up in the next few, that would be great.
Perfect. Okay. There's two additional membership types. Affiliate members are essentially members that don't quite meet the full threshold to be a cohort member. And additionally, an affiliate member might be an individual with specific expertise that can help the IHCC. A third category of membership would be industry membership, again, recognizing the unique goals and the unique features that an industry member would bring to IHCC. Importantly, if an industry member does fulfill the criteria for full cohort membership, they would be entitled and would be given full membership. Next slide. The membership agreement itself does not exist in a vacuum. Rather, there are other IHCC policies to which it links to, and that's important to recognize. Laura will discuss these later. Next slide. And just a quick update on the ratification to date. So basically about a third of our membership have ratified to date. For those of you who haven't ratified, I think Eric and other members of the Secretariat will be reaching out. One site did not ratify. I'm going to look at that in a second. Next slide, please. So these are the sites that have ratified. So again, thank you to all of you who went through it. Every site that completed the ratification survey said yes, they do agree to ratify. And again, as I said, the feedback was very minimal in terms of the substance of the agreement itself. It was really just softening some of the language. Next slide. The one site that did not ratify, this was the language I wanted to address. And the first line here in the first clause of the first line is important. This was a major change we had made. This is the initial language where it stated, where it does not impinge upon others' members' freedom to operate, IHCC members are free to pursue intellectual property. That language was perceived by one of the sites as the IHCC exercising some sort of ownership over a site's own data that they're bringing to IHCC, which again would totally violate our principles of fairness. So to address this, next slide, we just essentially just deleted that clause. So if that has been a kind of a hang up for any of the sites that haven't ratified, please be aware that we have addressed that, and that was just a kind of a failure of language, not of intent. Next slide. So I'll finish up here. So we have completed major steps in terms of soliciting, reviewing feedback from members. The IHCC Secretariat also conducted or contracted a legal review, which is also being completed. It kind of overlapped very much with membership feedback itself, so there's really no inconsistencies there. And we have essentially now consolidated all those sets of reviews and are passing it on to the policy co-chairs for additional updating, and it kind of will be their domain now moving forward. And the membership agreement, the charter development work group, is essentially winding down.
Thank you, John. Let me just ask while people are thinking, John, what kind of interest has there been from industry sponsors and our industry members, and have there been any concerns about particular conditions they might have, or conditions that we have that they can't live with, that sort of thing?
So AstraZeneca are the one industry member, I think, that have ratified the survey. We haven't gotten any feedback in terms of specific conditions or focus areas to date, at least to my knowledge. But I think it is important, and I like the update from May that they have been given kind of a ring-fenced kind of place on the scientific steering committee, because I think their needs should be addressed.
Great.
And this is Jeff. I'll just comment on that. We had a number of very engaged industry groups in the May summit, as you will recall, and each one of them expressed significant interest, as well as so we've had industry representation on the scientific review committee that reviewed the proposals that we approved in September. So I think there will be significant progress in that regard. Hopefully others will ratify the charter, as John indicated.
Great, thank you. And should we discuss how to deal with groups who have not responded on the charter? We have many who have. One group that has declined or asked for a revision, but there are others who have not responded, and I think at some point we need to sort of close the window for comments, but welcome people to continue to participate even if they haven't ratified the charter, but encourage them to do so. Do we have thoughts on that?
Well, I think certainly a requirement for access to IHCC resources. I think a requirement for that would be that you have completed the membership agreement. And I think when we had our funding proposal there in the fall, that was a requirement to submit a funding proposal that you had signed off in the agreement. I mean, I think it is something we put a lot of work into. I think it is important for us as a structural entity. So I assume and I hope that Eric and the resident secretariat will continue to poke members to complete the ratification process.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I believe Heather, you may want to speak up, but there is the issue of internally institutions have to sort of see a final document, and this is sort of described as still being in draft form, and that may be a challenge. That the difficulty though is that almost every time any lawyer looks at something, they want to make a change. And so hopefully we can get those comments in and make revisions as needed.
Yeah, this is Heather. I don't have anything additional to add. It's just that our institution would not sign off given that they're in draft form. So once they're finalized, I hope that we can be able to sign it. Super.
No, thank you. That's great. And I think it is a fair statement and recognizing the tremendous amount of work that went into putting this together by everyone on this call, as well as in the previous meetings, and that in order to have access to the resources, as well as to be a full partner and participating in the program, we would need people to sign off. So any other comments or questions?
Teri, this is Eric Plummer. Just a point for everyone is that we're in the process of re-verifying all of our cohort data via survey, and one of the issues that we'll include is a confirmation of agreement to this memorandum of understanding. So you can. Our members can look forward to seeing that coming up over the next couple of months.
Great, or even sooner, perhaps. Katerina, I see a comment from you. Would you like to speak up about the new request?
Well, no, it's just that maybe the papers were lost in the pandemic situation. So I wonder if you can send us the newest version of it, or expediting the signature. That's it.
Yes, no, that's a great idea, and we should definitely do that. And there is the challenge of version control. We see this with documents that get revisions. So let's put a clear date on the version that next goes out, and hopefully we could send that out fairly soon. Jeff, does that sound like a reasonable thing?
Yes, I was just thinking that we should send out what we call the final charter, date stamped. Hopefully the majority of our cohorts will ratify and sign it. And if any don't, we should understand why they're not signing. And then if there are issues that require a change, we can bring that back to the steering committee and approve, if necessary, a change to allow others to join in the future. But I think we should try to get to the end game of this process as quickly as possible.
Agreed. Great.
I would agree with that. Can I just underline the point that this is not a legal document. This is, rules of engagement. So again, if you're taking this to your institutions, just be sure to stress that point with them.
Maybe we need to make it clearer to people that what it means. I mean, if people sign the charter, these are the benefits in terms of the engagement in the consortium, access to data, and access to competitive funding applications. Because, I think we should make that clear. That if you're not a official member that has signed the charter, they would not qualify for competitive funding applications, and sort of try to delineate here are the key benefits, and we hope everybody comes on board and signs.
Now that makes sense. How can and I think also maybe identifying what it is that you're agreeing to quote give up, which as far as we can tell is nothing.
Right, it is nothing. It's a non-legal document, as Jeff said. I think people sort of may be misinterpreting something.
Yeah, I agree. Well, why don't we let Brittany go ahead? We only have 10 minutes left in this session, but we may have 9 minutes, but we may go a little bit over. Sorry, Laura. Brittany, why don't you go ahead?
I'm Brittany Zick. I'm a part of the Secretariat here, and I have been working with other members of the Secretariat on operationalizing some elements of the membership agreement, even though it is preliminary, but just getting the process started, and we'll go over certain sticking points that we're trying to work through now. Next slide, please. So, sorry, you can keep going, next slide. So just as a review, you already heard John talking about much of the timeline of the membership agreement, but essentially since the meeting in Reykjavik, we have made some progress on putting a membership agreement together. We had a draft, we went over this in May, and have been some revisions since then. We went through a preliminary ratification process, and since that point, we have been working on this implementation roadmap so that people can see much more clearly what it means when they are working with the IHCC, when they are members of the IHCC. Obviously, you guys can see that this is a question that comes up pretty regularly. So we're trying to provide some clarity on that with this implementation roadmap. Next slide, please. So the membership agreement is a bit theoretical in many ways, and we wanted to keep it that way so that people don't feel locked into anything. Again, we're trying to avoid people having reason to not want to work and be a part of IHCC. So our next step, in addition to knowing what we're aiming to do, is to outline how we're going to do those things. So our goal would be to document our many operational procedures, standard operating procedures for the IHCC, and allowing for this concept of version control that we just talked about, not just for the membership agreement, but for procedures that we have agreed upon. We really want to emphasize transparency. That was one of the main goals of the membership agreement, of course. Not just to our members, but also to potential funders. If they want to know about our procedures, we want to have those on hand to share with them as needed. Certainly also accountability and traceability are big goals that we're following here. Again, as we grow and evolve as a consortium, our needs are going to evolve, and traceability is going to be important for people to understand where we've come from and where we're going. We want to ensure that our processes are standardized, whether they are about governance or project solicitations like the ones that John just mentioned that we did earlier this summer. We want to make those procedures available to members on the IHCC website, for example, whether they decide to use them in their cohorts themselves, or just so that they understand what is in front of them if they are going to work on a joint IHCC project, for example. So eventually, we'd like to operationalize all of the elements of the membership agreement. We set a goal by the next summit in May of 2021. And so we'll just be kind of working through that on a stepwise basis. Next slide, please. So there's 12 pieces of the membership agreement. You heard John talk in more detail about the governance and membership pieces. We, as the Secretariat, prioritized a few different domains that we thought were pretty important based on discussions that have been had about the membership agreement. vision is obviously important, but that is being currently explored and fleshed out a little bit with the strategic planning process that we'll all be participating in. The next priority that we identified to be very high to be done quickly would be implementing the governance, and most specifically the scientific steering committee that I'll tell you a little bit more about. Also, all of the issues around data management, sharing, and access. We do have some policy documents that provide some additional theoretical guidance, and now we just need to operationalize in a little bit more detail. And clearly, these have been some sticking points even in cohorts as they were reviewing the membership agreement. Some of them had questions about data and what it means to join or participate, and so we want to give them details about that as quickly as we can. The other priorities we have here are membership. We just talked about a question that came up on what it means to really be a member. Let's clarify that sooner rather than later. And also amendments. So that was the last part of the membership agreement where it mentioned how this document can change and evolve as the needs of IHCC evolve. So we would also like to have a procedure for document control, not just for the membership agreement, but for all of the procedures that we're outlining now. Our needs will change and we will need a process to change the documents. Next slide. So this is kind of those SOPs that we know that we'll need kind of exploded out. There's a few different areas of governance that we'll be covering. We've also preliminarily assigned content owners, basically those people that are gonna start those procedures and revise them as necessary. As I mentioned, we prioritized a few of these elements and have the goal to have them all implemented or ready to implement by our next summit. The content owners for now are mostly stemming from the Secretariat, and then also many of our work group teams, our teams, our scientific strategy, our data team, our policy team, they will also own some of this content as we get started. Next slide. So just to give you an overview of this process, basically the content owner would start by examining the membership agreement, any supporting documents that we may have, whether those are the policy documents that many of us have seen, or just previous procedures that we have used that are not written down, formalized yet. Then that content owner would have a discussion with the steering committee, either at a meeting or via email, to solicit some details and answers to questions that are not clear yet, and then propose some implementation actions. And in many cases, that's going to involve an SOP to be written, an operating procedure. Then the steering committee will review, suggest changes, we would iterate, and eventually approve and disseminate to the stakeholders involved in that procedure. Next slide. So to give an overview of a couple of examples, you recently heard John talking about the Scientific Steering Committee. That was an addition to our current structure, or at least making it a little bit different than how it currently operates. I won't go over all of the details of the functions. John did that. But the steering committee, the Scientific Steering Committee in the membership agreement did explain that there should be 15 voting members. And this is really a way to make sure that membership is well represented in IHCC leadership. So it's going to include cohort representatives that are elected by IHCC membership. It will also include our work group co-chairs that are currently acting on the steering committee. And executive committee members now would be participating as observers only of the steering committee. But they don't vote with the Scientific Steering Committee. The membership agreement also outlined that there are 3-year terms and staggered rotation of members. And you can see here the functions of the Scientific Steering Committee, but as I said, John went over those, so I will move on. Next slide, please. So in order to operationalize this element of the membership agreement, first, we looked at the membership agreement, discussed some questions and concerns that we identified, things that needed to be clarified with the existing steering committee. Are the term limits renewable, for example? Are there eligibility requirements? And just asking about some details if we have opinions about them. And then our next step would be that the Secretariat, which is the content owner for this document, would draft an SOP for the processes important to the Scientific Steering Committee, outline the expectations of new members, how they should execute their responsibilities, and what would elections look like for new members as well. And then after having those discussions, we would then propose that the existing steering committee act as the Scientific Steering Committee for the temporary time until we have election of new members. Eventually, there will be 8 new members that represent the cohorts that are also functioning on the steering committee. But we have a couple of big things to do right now, like approve those policy documents so that other cohorts can then agree to the membership agreement. As you know, that's a sticking point. So making sure that we have a functional steering committee for the moment and then are ready to take on the new members after they're elected. I'm almost, I saw your note, Teri, I'm almost ready, almost done, sorry. Oh, next slide, please. Another one that you guys are probably familiar with from the summer, we obviously just did a funding award process. Now, there are details that I think will be further fleshed out in an actual procedure. We have something to start with the existing processes that we went through now a couple of times, and we'll just write those down, standardize, and agree upon them as a group. And we can go ahead and move on to 2 more slides. Go ahead, 1 more. So anyway, I'll kind of wrap up here. Our end goal with this process is just to make sure that all of the things that we have, many of us have agreed to theoretically at this point, are now established, standardized, repeatable, transparent processes that both our membership and funders potentially could review and make sure that they are in agreement with before they decide to engage with IHCC or join a consortium project or something like this, so that they really understand expectations. We have agreed upon what we think we'd like to do, and now we need to know how we'd like to do it. And we want to make sure that members have access to that information. Also, if we have these procedures written down, we can enable feedback and consensus and evolution of those processes. Eventually, since all of those procedures are going to be approved by the Scientific Steering Committee, and those steering committee members are elected for membership, the end goal leads us to having membership have input on how IHCC operates. So that is where we're moving to, hopefully by the next summit. That is the end of my presentation here.
Super. Thank you so much, Brittany. And we know, as Jeff noted, this isn't the most glamorous work, but it actually was something that at the Reykjavik Summit, our second one, there was a strong feeling that we needed to have some clear guidelines for how we're going to interact. So we very much appreciate this. Comments and questions for Brittany?
I just want to, again, say that I appreciate Brittany's ownership of this important part of the process. Somebody really needs to be tracking it and keeping us on our toes, and it's very much appreciated that you're doing so, Brittany. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I might note that Eric has kindly put the link to the slides. It's on a Google Drive into the chat. So we realize they've gone by a bit fast and they're kind of technical. So please take a look at that. You can download them and have them then. And I might also note that Katerina put a suggestion into the chat, which sounds very promising, in that, if you need the signature of the institution, there are going to be lawyers involved. But if this is basically an academic agreement, it could be signed by the PI. And I wonder if Jeff or others, if you'd like to comment on that.
I'll just say that it was, in my view, it was never really anticipated that this would be escalated to a lawyer review, that this was really meant for the cohort leaders to say, this makes sense and, we're in, and if not, why not? But I think it was not really meant to be a legal document, as we've said several times today. So hopefully Katerina's suggestion will be taken up by the cohort leaders that haven't joined in thus far.
Great. And we would think actually that maybe as big a challenge would be to get all the cohort members, if you're putting together a network of individual investigators, that might be a challenge to get them to agree. Even though, as we've pointed out, they're really not giving up anything, they're only gaining. So we hope that will be feasible. If there aren't other comments then, why don't we go ahead with the next session? And I'm sorry, it's not the next session, it's the next talk, which is the policy update.
I'm going to start again, since it's been a while, just to do similar to what John provided, with just a refresher on what the 3 policies were that were presented at the May Summit, and also walk through quickly what the changes were based on the discussions and some additional comments that were received since May. Also want to let you all know that we have had some new members of the work group, and of course, we'll be sure to advertise for additional members when we get there, and then talk about what we are thinking about doing with regard to moving towards implementation level discussions for data sharing in particular, and follow up to what Brittany was just talking about in terms of providing that next level down of granularity with exactly how IHCC is going to strive to do the work that it is intending to do and describing in these higher level documents. So next slide. Thank you. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm here representing IHCC in the policy group and not on behalf of my organization, so we can move on to the next slide. Just to, again, talk about the updates. I've already gone through most of this. Do just want to give a call out and thank you to folks, in addition to those who spoke up at the May Summit, who sent in written comments on the various policies following the May Summit. You can see here there were 5, and there is a larger proportion of our industry sector partners here, and that was, I think, reflective of the fact that we did some direct targeted solicitation of those partners to get feedback on the guidance for industry collaboration, because we had not had input from that sector before, and clearly they needed to be represented in the document. Next slide. Okay, so I'll just walk through each one quickly and at a high level, just again, the reminder, each of the policy documents is intentionally very clear about what the purpose of the document is and what the purpose is not. So for the publication policy, it is to make sure that we are supporting the timely and open dissemination of IHCC generated research and findings, as well as making sure that we have fair and equitable opportunities for all IHCC members to participate in authoring and therefore in leading the IHCC publications and the studies that they describe. The values that are reflected, again, going back to the membership agreement and things that John talked about in this particular policy, obviously point to the open and timely dissemination of findings, transparency about all IHCC activities, and again, promoting the inclusivity of cohorts participation within those activities. Next slide. Quick and very high level overview of what's within the document. It's really about defining and providing some detailed information with a fair amount of flexibility left within that, of what the types of IHCC publications might be, and by that defining differences between IHCC consortium papers or IHCC project papers, et cetera. Being clear again with regard to timeliness and open access issues, that we do hope that the publications will go forward in a reasonable time frame, and that there is an expectation that all publications will be put forward in open access formats. There is the usual discussion of what writing groups should include, the authorship contributions that in general should be followed. Also a call for an acknowledgement statement to be developed and included within every publication that reflects all of the cohorts that participated in the project described in the publication. And then finally, that thinking through these issues is really important to do up front. So there's an expectation that there's a publication and authorship plan that comes in with IHCC project proposals, so that the scientific project subcommittee can consider that and see that the group that's proposing the project to go forward has thought ahead to these issues. And to help with that, there is a template included as an appendix for the publication and authorship plan and what elements should be included. It doesn't have to be followed exactly, but it's something to hopefully make it a little bit easier and at least point to the issues to think about when IHCC project teams are putting together their proposal. Okay, next slide. The changes that were made following the discussion in May and the comments that were received were largely clarifications and highlighting of different issues that we wanted to, or that the group wanted to call more attention to. So there was some clarification around the options for what would be designated an IHCC consortium paper. In the original policy, it had talked more about issues where there were broad policy statements or descriptions of IHCC as an organization, and this was expanded to also be a situation where a large number of IHCC members participated in a project that could be considered a consortium paper, and also, again, just some other pretty granular discussions of what we called papers that came about through independent collaboration of IHCC members that didn't have anything to do with IHCC, just other than the fact that it happened to involve members, and those would be non-consortium papers. And we wanted to do that to make clear that this policy didn't apply to those. So that was the reason for going into the detail. Also added some explicit language around the encouragement from IHCC to include junior investigators in the leadership activities and the authorship recognition for IHCC generated publications. Added an expectation, again, an explicit expectation that research participants or data donors within the cohorts that participate in a given project described in a publication be acknowledged within the cohort acknowledgement statements. And then also, just again, down a little bit more in the weeds, wanted to make sure that we allowed appropriate time for organizational review of publications explicitly within the timelines proposed of what should be allowed for authors, et cetera, to be able to review publications before they went forward, and also thinking ahead to any communications planning that might be needed. So again, I think important but not major changes in terms of direction or underlying intent within this document. And if everybody's okay with it for time, I'll go through all three policies and then pause and ask if there are any questions. So next slide. Moving on to the guidance for collaboration with industry. This again was written as a guidance document, not a more formal policy document, so that it allowed maximum flexibility to adjust the agreements and some of the finer details around expectations to a particular partnership. But the purpose here was to support the establishment of those collaborations with industry partners in a way that promoted the IHCC vision and values. Again, here, the values that were reflected were all of the three primary values in terms of open and timely access to research activities, transparency, and again, promoting inclusivity of all cohorts within IHCC activities. Next slide. Within the content of this document, again, talks about the different types of collaborations that might exist, whether they're between cohort members, IHCC cohort members, and non-IHCC industry partners, or between cohort members where one of them might be a cohort from industry, or relationships where it's limited to providing some kind of resource that enables the cohort to go forward, whether that's, for example, sequencing or some other provision of resources to go forward, analytic capacity, et cetera. Other issues that then were included and discussed in this document had to do with the principles upon which collaboration should be built around. Those reflect IHCC values. Offered then points to consider in drafting collaboration agreements between the particular partners involved. Again, not providing a template, not providing specifics, but the points to consider up front to make sure, again, that the IHCC values are expressed and that things have been discussed up front, and that the issues around transparency and equitable distribution of the value for the partnership is all taken care of. And then finally, considerations, some other considerations for how to maintain those principles when partnering with industry. There's a checklist, again, going to this idea of flexibility that members can use in putting together these agreements. But again, this is meant to be a resource for cohort members, not something that is binding or restrictive in terms of what the expectations are. Next slide. Here, the changes had to do, again, with largely clarifications and making some things a little bit more explicit than they had been. So the first one here was really speaking to, in a more explicit way, the reciprocal interest of forming these partnerships and making sure that it was balanced in the presentation in terms of what an academic or nonprofit partner might get and what the industry partner might get out of this as well. And also expanding the examples in that to include stakeholders for different studies, for instance, benefits that might accrue to study participants or to populations represented by the study participants, et cetera. There was guidance that was clarified with regard to this only being applicable to IHC approved projects. So again, not affecting partnership agreements between IHCC members that do not pertain to their IHCC activities. Just focus on the IHCC activities themselves. We modified some of the language in what were called the first principles, which were sort of guidance around why collaborations might be formed in this regard. And again, really just wanting to make sure that we recognize the value for all of the partners. And again, here, the study stakeholders that might come out. And then finally clarifying, there's a point in there, again, with regard to transparency and trying to promote transparency around all partnerships. We're just clarifying that what we were expecting and what we plan to post on the IHCC website would be summaries of the collaboration agreements, not the detailed agreements, which would, one, be too long and hard to interpret for people not involved, but also just might include information that's really only relevant to the participants themselves. Or other reasons that might be appropriate. And so this is really just looking for a high-level summary so that we can make sure there is general awareness of who is participating and what the goals of the partnership are. Next slide. Moving on to the third and final document that was presented in May, the core data sharing principles. Here, again, just a reminder, this was not a data sharing policy per se, because we're still waiting to get some information on some of the specific constraints and real issues that all cohorts need to think about with regard to data sharing activities, from legal frameworks to existing consent promises, et cetera. And so here, just trying to lay the foundation of some basic principles that IHCC would use in developing data sharing plans for specific projects going forward until we can move to sort of developing some common themes with experience that we could try to expand into something that might apply more broadly. So again, this foundation in terms of its purpose and expressing the values of open and timely dissemination and transparency is obviously very key with this one around how we would go about forming these policies and how we would even talk about any data sharing from IHCC. Next slide. Here, I wanted to pause a bit and remind everyone that, again, because we were trying to take advantage of work done by other organizations focused on the challenges and opportunities of coming together around international research, we looked to other existing frameworks with regard to the ethical foundation that we might use for forming a basis for our own data sharing principles, and settled on that from the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. And just on the next slide is a very quick reminder, since I think it's fundamental to what we'll be talking about, of what that framework is. And it is a framework really that is intended to promote individuals' rights to participate in research and to benefit from research. And fundamentally, it assumes as a baseline that there is locally appropriate informed consent and oversight of the studies that is going on. So that is, again, the baseline for anything that is talked about afterwards in terms of how to put together a policy. It also relies on several foundational principles and then discusses 10 core elements that should be thought through for any organization that is using this framework in designing data sharing policies or practices going forward. And so this is what we would use as we were to start to look at our data sharing plans layered with our own principles, which on the next slide we'll begin to talk about. So in this document, again, it notes the reliance upon the GA4GH framework. And then it talks about the fact that the principles, which break into two categories, foundational principles, which are basic expectations to promote those IHCC strategic goals and our values, as well as a few aspirational principles, which build on those basic principles that we would like to see IHCC activities move forward toward, based again on where IHCC is trying to get through its vision and its mission. And so what's important to understand again and how these core data sharing principles are intended to work is that they work as a unit. And so it's assumed that all are in place, not one or the other. And that becomes important when we're looking at how to implement them, because there are interdependencies for them to be practical and pragmatic for cohorts to work within them. And just as a quick highlight, I'm not going to go into the details, but for the foundational principles, these basic expectations really rely upon the fact that first and foremost, there will be a robust process for all data management activities, and that the local governing laws and policies of a cohort will be followed in any data sharing policy within which that cohort participates. So it's never, it's always respected, I guess, is what I would say, and how it's going forward. And so it's those kinds of fundamental issues, not sharing individual level information without appropriate permissions, et cetera, that are covered in these basic principles. So next slide. Things that changed here, again, there were not as many things that changed of substance. I think because these were at such a high level and we could all agree to them, that's why we're all part of the IHCC. So there are some clarifications, again, that the purpose was to of the document was to provide a foundation upon which specific plans would be used going forward for data sharing based on those capacities for data sharing, legal restrictions, et cetera, and policies of the participating cohorts, so that it really is just the starting point. We also added some more explicit language around the principles to be clear that these principles were also meant to be a living document, so that we would be updating them based on experience gained through IHCC projects. So these were not static, but it would be a dynamic issue and document. And then finally, we just made some conforming changes to reorder the principles to improve their clarity and their flow, which are very helpful, but did not change the substance in any way. So I believe that is my last policy slide. So I can go to the next one, and then I'll take the questions. The next one, I believe, just goes over what the next steps were. As Brittany alluded to, we're hoping if the steering committee is acting as the scientific steering committee in the interim until members can be elected from cohorts, that we would take these policies for provisional approval to the steering committee at an upcoming meeting. And then as soon as the full scientific steering committee is constituted and assembled, we would present these policies for formal review by that group and final approval. But we think we hope to get there with the provisional approval, again, so that groups can use them as a basis to make decisions about their willingness to come on board and sign the membership agreement, which draws on these various policy documents. So I'll stop here and just see if there are any questions. I'm not seeing anything in the chat.
Just from me too, one is I asked whether the documents in the revised form are now on the IHCC website for everybody to look at. That's question number one.
So that is a question I actually was going to email Eric afterwards, because I'm not sure exactly where they're posted right now, but we can follow up with that. Or Eric, if you want to make a comment right now, that'd be great.
The policy documents are posted on the website, yes.
Eric, if you have a chance and could just put that link into the chat, that would be terrific.
Will do.
Thank you.
And the other question was around publications. I'm wondering if, I know, Hakan, you're readying, I think, a publication around the PRS project. I'm wondering if that is going to be the first one really to go through the formal publications process that you outlined, Laura or Hakan.
We certainly hope so, Jeff, and we should have a draft very soon to circulate. I mean, we were sort of held up because of this potential to get the 23andMe data set, which obviously is a huge sort of addition to what we had. But I mean, that has sort of, ended up in back and forth legal discussions. So it's probably not gonna work. But we have all the other cohorts, fully analyzed and the paper sort of, near a draft form of circulation. So I'll update on it on Wednesday more.
Great. Thank you. Well, then, Laura, if you could just move on then, please.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so these next ones, we can go ahead and go on to the next slide. The first thing I wanted to do is, one, come back and thank the existing members of the Policy and Biodata Sharing Work Group that contributed to all of the work that happened in pretty condensed fashion last winter and spring, as we took the draft of the membership agreement and then built on that for these policies, and also acknowledge and welcome and thank the additional members that joined after the May summit. You can see their names and who they're representing here. You can also note that with the exception of the World Economic Forum, which does have a global footprint, still the members we have participating are also from the US. And so we would really love to get members joining us from other parts of the world, particularly from those on the opposite side of the hemisphere from where we are. So that we can just have all of the voices and perspectives represented while we are talking about these important issues around data sharing and any of the other policies here. So please do reach out and contact me if you were interested in joining. That would be great. Next slide. So the next, again, as I mentioned, following up on Brittany's discussion with regard to moving towards implementation, is how will we advance the data sharing plans going forward? And there are a couple of different angles that we are planning to take at this point. One is, of course, to work with the IHCC projects, either those that are underway or those that are getting underway from the funding round this summer, to identify what data sharing issues they might need some consultation on from the policy group, and to also help the policy group. And again, thinking about where are those themes where we should give our priority attention to try and get to more of that how level of conversation that we will be doing data sharing, rather than simply just what are our principles and our values in doing so. We also plan to coordinate with a data atlas team, which you'll hear from tomorrow, who's moving forward with populating the data atlas and building out the platform to, again, just see where we might be of assistance to them, which will hopefully help them progress in their work, and will also undoubtedly help us learn where some of the issues are that we need to consider as we build out data sharing plans. And then finally, we will take the information garnered to date from the policy survey that was mentioned earlier, which we're now up to about 27 cohorts who have completed it, which is great. So thank you. If we move to the next slide, I was just going to talk about that a bit, and again, give a shout out on the next slide, please, to those cohorts who have provided the information. And again, apologies that all of this is done in terms of acronyms versus being more explanatory, but that's how it would fit on the slide. Again, we have about 27. So if we're now up to 110 or so, that means we've got about a fifth of the cohorts represented. So if you don't see your cohort's name up there and would still like to do the survey, I would love to send it to you. It is posted, and I will make sure that that link gets posted up in the chat here, as well as sent out afterwards, especially for the new cohorts who have not known about it before. And I thought it would be helpful, again, as we move to a more granular level, to show you the kind of information on the next slide that we're asking through the survey, to try to really understand where the rubber's going to meet the road in terms of being able to share data from cohorts. So next slide, please. So there are 8 questions on this survey, and they do really dive down into specific issues. And the first 5 of these questions are all broken out. It's done in a Google form so that it's as easy as possible and hopefully as minimally burdensome as possible to collect the information. But each of these first 5 questions are asked by different data types to, again, understand where exactly will issues pop up for IHCC projects in sharing different kinds of data. And the data types that are specifically called out are individual level genomic and phenotypic data, summary level data, metadata, case report forms, or other kinds of associated information for the cohorts, as well as beginning to collect information on specimens and data sharing expectations for specimens. In addition to having some pre-populated sort of click button options around things like, are there requirements for the data access committee to review? Are there requirements for IRBs or ethics boards to review, et cetera? In each of these scenarios, there are also free text boxes so that we can learn as much as possible, again, in as easy to digest and quick to fill out pathway as possible for cohorts to provide it to us. Asking about requirements for sharing, asking about legal issues that need to be addressed. In terms of the question about where may analyses of cohort data occur, that has to do about whether or not all analyses have to be done within an enclave or a specific platform, whether data could be downloaded to another location for coordinated analysis, or anything else that might be required in terms of where the data need to reside in order for analyses to occur. Also questions again about collaboration expectations with cohort investigators or institutional investigators, et cetera. Talking about costs, so IHCC can plan for those as well for sharing data or specimens. And then some higher level questions around to understand the informed consent. What is present in terms of what participants consented to for data or specimens beyond the initial study investigators, beyond the initial study itself? What types of secondary research is possible under the existing consent? And then also a more open question to anyone completing the survey around where they might need help or see gaps that it would be great if IHCC could address that would support their own work in their own countries, in their own settings, et cetera, to promote data or specimen sharing in international research, again, whether IHCC or not. So that's just a preview of the kind of information, and hopefully that also helps to understand why completing it will really help us to see where we are across all of our different cohorts as the cohorts begin to come together in IHCC projects, so that we can anticipate as many as possible to make the science be able to go forward as smoothly and efficiently as possible when we get to specific projects that are ready to launch. And I think that is the last slide, or almost the last slide. So this was just, again, an opportunity to pause to ask for suggestions from the group on where to focus as we begin to ramp up the policy work again. Beyond those 3 ideas that we've put forward for how to do this, anything else that the group would suggest that we focus on?
Great. Thank you, Laura. Let's stay on this slide because I think the next one is just questions and comments, right? Yeah. Okay. So suggestions from the group, particularly for prioritizing, but other things as well. I might ask Håkon, since he was involved in the developing the polygenic risk score collaborative project, can you comment on challenges that have already been identified, since yours is probably the most furthest along?
Yeah, I mean, we actually had a very smooth exchange with the participating sites. So data was actually pulled together and analyzed here by Patrick, and subsequently provided back to the sites and meta-analyzed. I mean, the only encounter, as I said, was sort of this issue that came up, and it came up around the charter as well, around intellectual property, that one of the sort of large group elected not to participate as a result. I mean, we obviously believe that it's exceedingly unlikely that there would be intellectual property coming from a polygenic risk score. It has been around. There would be prior art, and even though we are looking at diversity cohorts, it's exceedingly unlikely that sort of as a strategy would would result in that. But this was the only obstacle really that we encountered. I mean, some of the cohorts, they did not manage to get the data to us in time. We got some of that data later, just because it took a little longer to put it together. But it, was in general strong, interest and agreement to share the data for the purpose. Apart from that one encounter.
Great, thank you. So Laura, I wonder if you might comment on the survey. When are you hoping to get responses back? I know you've gotten some already.
So I actually was not going to hawk for survey responses this time because I've done it every other meeting and I thought it might be getting tired. But then I heard we had new members, so I thought I'd throw it in there anyway. Right. So we have 27 sets of responses, and so while that's not everyone, I think it identifies a lot of issues we can begin to work on. So I am happy for folks to send it out. I'll make sure that the survey goes out there. We won't put another deadline on it. Sooner is better because we can work it in, but we will take the information whenever you can get it to us. And in an ongoing rolling way, as we get new members, also include it hopefully in what we ask of them as they're coming on board, so we can integrate their issues into our thinking.
Great. So thank you much, Laura. Our next objective was to look at how IHCC can rapidly mobilize to address the pandemic. We identified a number of actions and steps, and since you all have access to the chat, I won't read through them all, but they are all complete, which is wonderful, and some are ongoing. If you go to the next, please. So we have 3 speakers for the next session. We do have time assigned to you guys, so it would be great if you could stay within 10 minutes. That will put us a little bit into the break, allowing time for questions and discussions. But so a little bit less than 10 minutes would be great. But at any rate, we'll hear from Sarah Bauermeister on the global mental health impact, John Chambers on biospecimen collection, and Michele Ramsay on the novel study in South Africa. So Sarah, please.
Hello, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to share a little bit about our project. I will try to be as quick as possible. So if we can go on to the first slide and I can start. So first of all, so the 3 working group co-chairs, we've put together a proposal. So this is a 3-site proposal and I'm speaking on behalf of the 3 co-chairs. So if we just move on, please, to the first slide. So the team of the 3 lead team, should I say, is first of all myself, based at the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Oxford on behalf of Dementia's Platform UK, Jordan Smoller at Harvard Medical School, and Andre Brunoni at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. And if we can go on to the next slide, please. So the background to our proposal is to look at the impact of COVID-19 on mental health. And as we are all experiencing this, we can all imagine that the impact is global and it is pervasive over all the global impact, and none more than those who already experience mental health problems. So it is bringing an unprecedented set of challenges impacting everyone. So especially first responders and healthcare providers, they are facing overwhelming stress and trauma, and also on communities, bringing drastic disruption of social connections within families and within communities. There are interruptions of schooling and socialization for young people, and there is threatening of the long-term effects on emotional development across the lifespan. And this is incredibly important work for those suffering from mental health disorders. So we can look at the widespread impact on mental health from a few figures here extracted from June 2020, and the share of adults who are just experiencing stress, anxiety, or sadness. And this is just common across all people, let alone those already experiencing pre-existing disorders. So unemployment, economic downturn, and insecurity, which is caused by COVID-19, is causing additional further distress. And those with pre-existing disorders are automatically cut off from their usual care programs, their usual therapy sessions, and this is having an additional impact on pre-existing disorders. Those with dementia who are cut off in care homes, there is figures coming out that 80% of those with dementia are experiencing an acceleration of decline, cognitive decline, and social isolation, which is exacerbating their symptoms, which is a drastic effect. Some of the figures coming out of the social studies social study out of University College London, the fantastic work by Daisy Fancourt. You can see here that those with depression and anxiety at the beginning of lockdown, extremely high. When you go through into the summer, lockdown was lifted. This started to get better, and those with lower income and those with ethnic minority groups, this is exacerbated, and those with pre-existing mental health diagnosis, again, this is exacerbated in these groups, and these figures are ongoing, and you can see the longitudinal effect on mental health is an ongoing problem. So the aims of our study is to, first of all, we have three main aims. One is to catalogue the availability of cohorts in the IHCC and selected non-IHCC who have a mental health assessment both during and after the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are going to create a harmonized set of selected domains and variables to build an international cooperative platform and enable cross-cohort analyses, working in conjunction with the IHCC data standards and infrastructure team, and also using the common data model of DPUK, which CSERV, the CSERV common data model, in order to bring these disparate data sets together. Aim 2 is to conduct a cross-cohort analyses to address key questions. Number 1, how is the pandemic affecting rates of mental health symptoms and disorders over time? Which individual level factors predict at risk and resilience? We will examine these changes and how they differ by demographic factors such as age, sex, race, ethnicity, and geographic region. We will focus on at-risk groups, such as those with pre-existing mental health disorders. Importantly, part 2, we will also look at the social determinants of health and how they modify the impact of COVID-19, such as socioeconomic status, education, occupation, discrimination, access to healthcare, insurance, and housing density. Aim 3, we will also characterize the neuropsychological and cognitive manifestations and complications of COVID-19. Emerging evidence is showing MRI evidence of changes in brain structure. We'll look at how these changes are having an impact on cognition in longitudinal cohorts. So we want to examine these changes in cognitive functioning both before in cohorts who have cognitive outcomes before and after the pandemic, and those who've experienced the cognitive COVID-19. So our methodology is that aim 1, we will survey and curate all the cohorts in both IHCC and DPUK who've expressed an interest in taking part in our research, and we will curate these according to the DPUK CSERV model. Aim 2, we will define quantitative and categorical mental health outcomes. We'll use longitudinal analytic methods. We'll combine these results in a meta-analysis. We will conduct focused analyses on the social determinants of health using univariate interaction and mediation analyses. AIM-3, we will characterize the neuropsychological and cognitive manifestations of COVID-19 infection using the at-risk groups which we have identified in AIM-2. Some of the exposures we will be focusing on will be COVID-19 related, but also medical comorbidities, psychosocial stressors, economic vulnerability, resilience factors, and genetics, if available from our cohort. We will also be looking at covariates such as demographics, social determinants, high-risk occupation groups, pre-pandemic psychiatric history, pre-pandemic substance abuse, genetics, mental health outcomes. And although we appreciate not all our cohorts will have all of these, we will make use of standardization procedures, harmonization, and the use of latent constructs using structural equation modeling so that we can bring together heterogeneous and disparate data sources. This is our timeline, which we are hoping to adhere to. We acknowledge this is a huge project and a huge undertaking, and we hope that the team we've brought together in the next slide, please. Oh, sorry. These are the cohorts which have expressed an interest in helping us bring together these data sources, which we will start to look at over the next month. Deliverables by site. This is how we will hope to achieve our project aims. In the Oxford site, we will be overseeing data curation, standardization, and harmonization using an experienced team that we use in DPUK, and we will also be supervising analyses for AIM-3, assisting on AIM-2. At Harvard, the project will be coordinated, and also 2 analysts will be working across AIMS 2 and 3. And in Sao Paulo, we will also have an analyst working on AIMS 2 and 3. Thank you for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. Questions or comments for Sarah and the mental health group? So I did have one, Sarah, when you showed the bar graphs of levels of anxiety in different countries, I noticed the US was at the top, and I'm not surprised. Hopefully some of that has gone down in the past couple of days. But regardless, I wondered if you had any information. All of those seem to be sort of, market upper income countries. Do you have information from other parts of the world?
At the moment, we don't have a specific to by country, but we're really hoping that this project will be able to address exactly that, which is why we've brought that into AIM-2. We want to look at ethnic and country and regional divide and see how it's affecting different populations.
Yes, that will be critical.
I have a question. As I looked at the types of data you're collecting, how challenging do you anticipate it will be to harmonize the data? It seems like a lot of the data types might be quite heterogeneous. When it comes to neuropsychiatric disorders, for example.
Yes, I think that we're being very realistic. This is a 12-month project, and we're not going to try and attempt to harmonize large cohorts. It will simply be impossible. So I think what we're going to be doing is we're going to be focusing on standardization of naming structure and working with latent constructs. So in other words, we will be looking for a depression score across, say, 5 cohorts, and then this depression score will be named in the same way, and then we will make use of latent constructs. But that said, we may harmonize a small select number of variables, perhaps 5 to 10 variables in a separate analysis.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And it is wonderful to see Brazil playing such an active part. So many thanks to our Brazilian colleagues and Chile also. But would be great to have more diverse places participating. South Africa, I see you on the group, on the chat in that. So please do participate if you can. So I think in the interest of time, we should probably go to the next presentation. And John, please take it away.
Hi, thanks. So I'm presenting this on behalf of our Biospecimens working group. That's led by myself. I work at LKC School of Medicine in Singapore and jointly at Imperial College London in the UK. co-contributors are Laura Rodriguez from the US, Caterina Ferriccio from Chile, Anu Kasturi-Ratne from Sri Lanka, and Khadija Khawaja from Pakistan. Next slide. So our proposal was put forward under the COVID umbrella initially, but the thinking behind it came from two strands. The first strand was that between us, we're responsible for, several of the co-applicants are responsible for trying to deliver large-scale population studies. And in doing that, we faced a recurring question around what is the optimum strategy for collecting biospecimens that are going to be fit for purpose for the next 20 years. And as an example of that, myself and my team spent 2 weeks trying to work out what was the optimum strategy for storing RNA samples that would be fit for purpose across a range of potential utilities over the years ahead. And I'm convinced that after 2 weeks, we still haven't got to the best strategy. So we spent a lot of time trawling through Google, PubMed, other people's protocols, but the sense we got was that there was substantial evidence gaps in terms of what represented best practice. So that was one rationale. Second rationale for the working group's proposal was the proposal that we submit samples for COVID-related experimentation. And in parallel with that, we're also getting requests to submit samples to the CZI Human Cell Atlas. And it was clear that whilst high-income countries were able to contribute samples rapidly and well, that wasn't the case for samples from some of the underserved populations in LMIC settings. And it's quite interesting to see and very much enjoyed the previous presentation, but I note there's almost no representation from LMIC cohorts in that mental health work. So the working group set out to address two challenges. First of all, what are the best strategies for collecting, storing high quality samples in longitudinal population studies, and how can we foster those capabilities in low resource environments? Secondly, if we are going to go about sharing data and samples between settings, how can we make sure that we understand what the regulations are and we're doing it responsibly? Next slide. So the overarching aim for the biospecimen proposal was to carry out a piece of work over 12 to 18 months that would strengthen biosample collection, promote sample documentation, facilitate sample sharing, in particular amongst cohorts that are aligned to IHCC, and that focus on populations from underrepresented environments. Next slide. So we've got two themes of work that we're planning to pursue to address those gaps over the next 18 months. The first gap that we seek to address is one of knowledge. What are the optimal strategies to biospecimen collection? What are the relevant operating regulatory and ethical frameworks that we need to be aware of? And what are the current biospecimen repositories that exist? Some of that overlaps with work being done elsewhere within IHCC. We heard Laura's excellent talk, and there's also work in the IHCC Atlas. So perhaps the area that we'd most like to focus on within this knowledge gap arena is trying to bring together a community-driven resource to document, describe what is best practice for biospecimen collection, and to identify where there might be areas of limited knowledge where we might be able to build proposals for future experimentation. And we envisage this developing as a WikiHow resource, a go-to place that people can access as an open source repository to answer key questions. And this would be fostered by the study team, but would be community driven. Most of of our cohorts, there are passionate people working in laboratories who really understand these problems, but they haven't been able to exchange and share their knowledge as freely as perhaps they could do. So we hope to tap into the wealth of expertise that is out there and draw it together collaboratively. The second theme is a demonstration project, a capacity building demonstration project to address a relevant topical experiment around biosample collection and sharing. And as mentioned, we wish to focus upon strengthening biospecimen collection in underserved settings. We want to advance collection of high quality samples that are a little unusual and address state-of-the-art needs. And one opportunity that arises there is the collaboration with the Human Cell Atlas, sponsored by CZI, and who have chosen to sponsor this piece of work as opposed to it being sponsored by IHCC. So there's nice alignment. So what we're planning to do is to reach out across LMIC setting cohorts and to set up frameworks for collection of isolated peripheral blood cell subsets and put in place mechanisms for sharing those with the CZI Human Cell Atlas framework. Next slide. So the collaborating groups, despite being just 5 applicants, we managed to straddle 6 of the WHO United Nations global regions. We represent Europe and North America, South America, Middle East and North Africa, South Asia and Southeast Asia through this partnership. And it'd be great to consider extending this further east to China and or Japan. Next slide. Last slide. This is our provisional timetable. We hope to get the knowledge base framework set up over the first 3 months, reach out to the community by month 6 so that we can have completed at least a first pass of a knowledge base relevant to biospecimens for population cohorts by month 9. Our demonstration project, we will aim to get the IRBs in place within 3 months. We're talking about collecting perhaps 100 specimens from each of 6 locations and get that done by month 5 or 6, and then transfer and analyze 500 to 600 sample sets by the end of the year. We believe that those are reasonable objectives. And then by the end of 12 months, we'll have completed a sufficient piece of work in both the knowledge and the demonstration project arena that we'll be able to put together a proposal for a larger externally funded vision that continues to fund preparing for relevant experiments from the low resource settings. Thank you for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, John. So John, I'm a little bit curious in terms of where these specimens are being collected or stored, or are they staying within the cohorts themselves and just the analyses being done on site?
So the samples will come. The proposal is that we try to bring samples, we collect high quality samples in field, and we try to make sure we have good mechanisms for ethically, legally transferring samples to a core laboratory for joint analysis. We're confident, based upon previous experience, that the regulatory frameworks will be addressable. And actually, we think that my own ambition is that we improve the technical capabilities of the researchers in country to be able to collect high quality samples and then analyze the data that comes out of them, as opposed to necessarily trying to set up additional molecular laboratories in each setting.
Mm-hmm.
There's
super
capacity in collection and analysis.
No, that sounds very wise. And Melanie Courteau has asked about plans for the catalog. Will it be built in parallel or integrated with the current atlas that we have for informatics data?
We aim to support, so we need to reach out and work with the Atlas team. Eric has been encouraging us to do that for some time. I believe a call was supposed to be set up, but I don't think I've seen a date for that yet. So we need to reach out and we're expecting the Atlas team to show leadership, but we are pleased to support and help foster our LMIC communities.
Super. Great. All right. And you were well under 10 minutes, so good for you. All right. Why don't we go on then, because I know we're a little bit behind. If we go on to Michele Ramsay, please take it away.
Great. Thank you very much, Teri. Thanks for the opportunity to speak just briefly on this pilot project, and also for the support from the IHCC to actually make it a reality. So in the next slide are the people who are part of this small project. So it really is a host genomics project in an African cohort. And there are a number of study leads who are part of this project, primarily because we need to identify enough participants with serious COVID-19 to be able to do our first host genomic study in South Africa. So you can see that the second and third groups there are part of SAPRIN, which of course is a member of the IHCC, but it also contains other members that are part of our institute and part of our bigger university community working on COVID. So in the next slide, I just want to list the cohorts that will be involved. So they're not all IHCC cohorts. So very importantly, we've needed to work with our hospital, which is associated with Wits University, the biggest, I think, hospital in the Southern Hemisphere, Baragwanath Hospital, to try and partner there with people who are already doing COVID studies, and then really leveraging their infrastructure to get samples for genomic, for DNA and for doing genomic studies. Then the next one is Vukuzazi from SAPRIN. And of course, Kobus Herbst is on the call here and has, I'm sure, told you a lot about it. And we were hoping to leverage Vukuzazi for this pilot study. However, what Kobus has said to me is that there are only about 50 individuals now that they know have COVID or have had COVID, and for whom there are samples available, but they've all been mild cases or asymptomatic, which is interesting. And then with regard to Agincourt, also part of SAPRIN, they have the first study, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later. And then we're also hoping to leverage an HIV cohort in Johannesburg to really look at the co-occurrence of COVID and HIV. And then the H3 Africa Collaborative Center that I lead, which is called COVIGen, which is 12,000 individuals, originally a population cross-sectional study looking at cardiometabolic diseases, but we're also keen to look at the impact of COVID on this group. So the next slide, first of all, just tells us what's happening in South Africa with regard to the COVID-19 statistics at the moment. And I think everybody is aware that in the African continent, South Africa is leading by far. And what we do know is that in many of the other African countries, it appears that there is a lower prevalence and perhaps also a lower percentage of deaths. So in the next bullet are some of the reasons or hypotheses that have been put forward as to why it might be that Africans are less affected by COVID-19. But I think, we still really don't know. So one of the reasons we don't know is that there is incomplete data and not nearly enough testing going on across different countries in Africa. But people have suggested that there might be increased immune protection for people in Africa because of universal vaccine coverage like BCG, and also increased exposure to other coronaviruses and pathogens. And then one of the other reasons that people have put forward is that the population demography in general across Africa is different, that the population is younger, that there are more people living in rural areas as opposed to urban areas that tend to have higher infections, and that comorbidities may generally be lower or different. But then, of course, what we're interested in is whether there is genetic susceptibility, which is impacting the effect and the outcome of COVID. So the next slide is talking about the International COVID-19 Host Genetics Initiative. And I just had a look at their website again yesterday to see what the latest information was. And I know that some of the people who are part of this initiative are also on the call. So this initiative, we haven't registered with them yet, but I think we need to do that. And they already have 220 registered studies from across the world, including, I think, 3 in Africa. So the Manhattan plot, which is looking at a genetic association with severe respiratory confirmed COVID cases compared to population controls, has shown highly significant associations on chromosomes 3, 6, 7, 12, 19, and 21. And a lot of work is going on at the moment trying to understand the biology underneath this, like why are these regions showing susceptibility, because many of them have a whole host of genes sort of nested under the signals, all of which have biological plausibility in terms of susceptibility to COVID. So the question for us really is, would these regions also be significantly associated in African populations? And I want you to note the sample sizes here, because the severe cases are just under 5,000, and that is compared to population controls of over 1.3, almost 1.4 million population controls. So in our study design, what we would like to do is really identify severe COVID cases to do the genotyping on, and then use our population controls in South Africa from the H3 Africa COVIGen study, where we have 5,000 to really do our genetic association study. So the next slide really puts out our aim. So it is about understanding host genetics for the viral infection and disease progression in South African populations to generate knowledge that could potentially inform an approach in a clinical setting in the future. So the first is to explore host genomic contributions and for COVID-19 outcomes in Black South African patients. And of course, we will need to think about the power of our study, which essentially will be replicating or looking for replication in the first instance. Then the second objective is to really leverage our partnerships to identify clinical and demographic features that contribute to vulnerabilities in COVID outcomes. And also, if possible, to look at gene-environment interactions. And lastly, something that we would like to do, but won't be able to do under this funding, is to really get other participants or studies to work with us to increase the power of our study, and specifically to reach out into other parts of sub-Saharan Africa, not just South Africa. So in the following slide, I'm just going to briefly talk about SAPRIN, because this is one of the key partners. And although SAPRIN participants may or may not be part of this first sort of pilot, they will certainly be part of the bigger initiative and what we're aiming to do. So this is a map which you may have seen previously. So SAPRIN stands for the South African Population Research Infrastructure Network. And there are currently 3 enabled sites shown in the red, several under development, and then some that are planned. So what I mentioned previously were 2 of the established SAPRIN nodes. So the one of them being in KwaZulu-Natal, which is the one further south, east here, and the one in the north of the country, which is really Agincourt. And each of these groups follows 100,000 individuals in 20,000 households. And in the next slide is a slightly outdated slide of data provided by Quibus, really showing, first of all, where their Vukazazi study is located in the northeast of KwaZulu-Natal, but also the number of households that they're currently following, and showing in the red dots, which I know you can't see very well, the ones where they have identified individuals who are either suspected or have confirmed COVID-19. So I think that picture will be unfolding as time goes by, because they're doing bi-weekly screening in a smaller group to really identify what is happening longitudinally with regard to COVID exposure. The next slide shows one study in the Agincourt saccharin node, and this is called FIRST, and you can see what the acronym is there. And this is another set of principal investigators. And what they're doing at the moment is collecting nasal swabs twice weekly in all the participating households that they're following for this project. And the next slide just shows some of their data. And that is showing us that in this rural community in the north of South Africa, the prevalence of COVID is about 30%, but the majority of these individuals are mildly affected and do not require hospitalization. And when we look at the data from the International COVID Host Genetic Study, the signals or the associations are less strong when people have very mild COVID or very few symptoms. So because our study is so small, we actually will have to focus on the more severe side of the spectrum, and therefore, despite this high prevalence, may not be able to source a lot of serious cases from the two saccharin sites. So the last slide is just the short-term and long-term goals for the study. So first of all, to talk about the short-term, which is really this funding opportunity that we're considering to be about a 12-month project. So through the funding provided through the IHCC with additional support from Illumina, who are giving us a 50% discount on the H3 Africa array, genotyping array, which we will be using, and some of the funds from our institute, we'll be able to genotype 576 Black South Africans with COVID-19. And as I said, we will really select those at the more severe spectrum and compare them to population controls from our H3 Africa study and do the genetic association analyses, which may only be powered to do validation or replication of previous signals. But if there are some high effect variants, we may be able to see them in this very small study. Longer term, of course, we would like to increase the sample size, look at more of the nuance of the phenotype of COVID-19, and also include studies from other African countries. And that's all from me now. Thank you, Teri.
Great. Thank you so much, Michele. That was terrific. So I do wonder, Michele, when you said that there are other cohorts within Africa, obviously H3 Africa and that, do you think there's the possibility of getting some of the COVID measures into those cohorts that could then combine with your data?
So I think that would be an ideal thing to do, Teri. I think there are lots of challenges. One is actually going back to the cohorts and systematically identifying cases. So I think, that is quite difficult to do and requires funding and dedication. So I think some of our colleagues in H3 Africa have applied for funding to do this. I know that we were not successful in, for example, getting funding to phone at 2 times our 12,000 participants, because that's essentially what you need to do. So I think, given more resources to do this, I'm sure some of the other cohorts would like to do that. We'll certainly reach out to them, if somebody is currently doing it and want to then be part of this host genomic study, that would be fantastic for them to join.
Great. And we did hear from Rachel Liao in terms of your being able to provide, include your data in the COVID HGI initiative. So she provided an email that will help you get there, which would be great.
Great, thank you.
All right.
And do we have, Michele, do you have a sense of the non-European ancestry representation in the Human Genomics Initiative, or maybe Rachel does? I'm just curious as to whether any African ancestry populations are represented currently in that initiative.
So maybe Rachel wants to answer, but I think African Americans are, I know that there are just 3 sites that registered. One of them is actually part of our group from Burkina Faso, but the prevalence has been extremely low there, so they have barely any cases that they would contribute. But the other 2, I think, are from other parts of South Africa. But Rachel?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So I think that the number 220 studies that you cited is the total number of studies registered with the Host Genetics Initiative, the actual number of studies who have been able to contribute data at this point is much smaller, is 36 in the most recent analysis. And none of those studies are based on the African continent. Some of them are mixed ancestry cohorts that do include individuals with African ancestry. For example, the Million Veterans Program from the US has a reasonably high percentage of participants who are African American. And then we do have other ancestries represented. For example, there's a Middle Eastern cohort in Qatar that participates. There are some Latin American cohorts and Asian cohorts that participate. But I don't think that, we obviously would really want to increase our genetic diversity for the study. So we would be very excited to partner with these studies as they generate data.
Great. All right, we really should move on. We're already 8 minutes into our break, and I have to warn you that we're going to start on time with the next session. So let me just summarize quickly. If you go to the next slide, please. What we heard in terms of the membership agreement is that Eric will send the one minor revision on the final agreement and distribute that shortly. Rather than changing the agreement itself, it might be useful to include with that distribution some language in the cover note that reassures people who've already signed on that there's only one change, so they don't have to go nuts and it's actually a deletion in looking at it again. And as well as language, again, reiterating it's not a legal document, but it's an academic agreement to be signed by the PI, and include, perhaps some language on what the groups are getting from this and what they may be risking, which we don't see to be very much, but obviously that's their judgment. And that also reiterate that data sharing is agreed to with each proposal for collaboration. So it's not something that they sign once and they can never take it back. We would like the remaining groups to sign and return by the end of December, or share their points of concern, because implementation steps are already beginning and the operating procedures will be developed hopefully in final form for presentation and actually some demonstration of them before the next summit. Next, please. On the policy and data sharing documents, we heard some clarifications, and they were mainly really just clarifications on the collaborations with industry and the data sharing principles. These will be shared for provisional approval at the upcoming steering committee meeting later this month. And then once the scientific steering committee meeting is constituted, it'll be presented for formal review. We would ask that you all take a look at the at the summary that was provided in the slides, which you all have access to now, and identify fundamental issues that you feel the policy work group should really prioritize and focus on immediately. And also, if you have other policy and data sharing resources from other groups that we should look to or that would be helpful for other members to have, we would like for you to provide those as well. And we do ask that the new cohorts who have joined on would respond to the policy survey by December 11th. Next, please. I think that's all. And then just before I get to this, and I'll ask Jeff to identify everyone, I would also note that in terms of the COVID sessions, it was fabulous to hear the neat science that's going on already that has been produced. We did hear that the biorepository team is planning to integrate their data with the Atlas team, and there's a coordinating call that will be set up quite soon. And then the COVIGen South Africa team is going to, hopefully will reach out to the COVID-19 HGI, and Rachel has provided a link for them to do that. So anything that I missed or anyone would like to add? If you think of other things, you can put them in the chat to everyone. And Jeff, do you want to wind up our session and tell us when we're restarting?
Sure. And thank you, Teri, and everybody for a great first session this morning. I wanted to once again thank the people that made this meeting and others possible: Hannah Cannell, Eric Plummer, Ida Donner, John Connolly, Teji Rocker-Burris, Chip Burris, Meredith Teri, and Brittany Zick, and Laura Reynolds, who's pictured in the center, will be helping us with the next session, which is our strategic planning. I first wanted to say how wonderful it is to be with everybody again after not being with you for 6 months. And I want to thank the breakout leaders and note takers for really making this an incredibly efficient process. And just the last 20 or 25 minutes have reinforced, at least to me, how important this taking a step back and looking at who we are and where we're going is. It's really critical to get the input from so many different vantage points. So I'm energized to know that we're actually headed in the right direction, but I'm also very cognizant of the fact that there are potential landmines out there that we need to understand and hopefully avoid. So I continue to look forward to working with Laura on getting us to the end game of this strategic planning process. It's not quite it's more of a marathon than a sprint. So I think it'll, evolve over the next couple of months. So we don't have to finish everything on Wednesday, as Laura said. And the last thing I'll just remark on is the progress that we've made that's exemplified in both the session we had this morning, the Teri chaired, and the one that we're going to have on Wednesday. I think the comment was made, we're really moving fast, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as we, thanks everybody for the 4.5 hours we spent today, and look forward to seeing you all on Wednesday.